Yo, what up? Welcome to another episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast. I'm Patrick, and once again, I am joined by my friend Aram, aka Aram in Toronto, which I'm calling you now. What's up, man? How's it going?
Good.
As I've said in the past, the reason why I call you Aram in Toronto is because you're in Toronto, but you're a Warriors fan from the day you could walk, born and raised in San Francisco, and like you really like feel it, right? And this episode is about something that, we feel really strongly about: the 2019 NBA Finals between the Golden State Warriors and the Toronto Raptors. There's some unspoken, unresolved stuff that I think we just need to get off our chests.
There's definitely some things to get off our chest. And I would say, look, I'm not looking to go total Cavaliers fan 2015 and say like, oh, if we had this guy and that guy, we would have won. I don't want to engage in loser talk. I'll say right up front, the Raptors balled out in 2019. They played great. It was a really tough series and hard fought, janky defenses. They threw everything at the Warriors and they won. So good for them. and we have talked over the last almost 2 years now about this series, and obviously it's was a big deal here. There's a freaking parade that it was like incredibly hard to get to work to that day.
You must have been mad.
It was just driving me crazy. I mean, people were fair. Like, they didn't rub it in my face. Like, they knew I was a fan, but didn't, like I said, they weren't rubbing it in my face. Like, people were genuinely happy here. It really united the city in ways that the city is almost like never united in that way. So, good for the locals, good for them. Horrible for me. And so just like starting from the beginning of the series, like, people, that are your friends, they must sometimes, some of them don't know you because they come up to you, and I've been here for 15 years, but they come up to you and they're like, who are you rooting for in this series? I'm like, are you kidding? Are you kidding me? So it was painful because it's like everybody around me it's obviously they're rooting for the Raptors, and I just felt so much on an island. And this was also a reminiscent feeling too in the Giants runs to the World Series and the previous Warriors runs as well. It's like I'm watching these games, like all these teams got good after I left, and you're just watching it alone on Eastern time. So you watch these games, and if they lose or they have a bad game, you're up until like 2:30 in the morning, and it's painful. So this was extra painful to be here.
For me, I got so many feelings, man. I can't even talk.
Do you have bullet points?
No, it's just like this cloud of emotion that I have from the what-ifs of that game and that series. But I do agree with you that the Raptors, they played really well that series, in the playoffs in general, and they had a good mix of veterans. And Nick Nurse is a great coach, but to me, and I agree, like, I'm not gonna try to sound all Cavs fanish, but if Klay and KD play that whole series, then it's moot.
Oh yeah. I mean, we can just get that out of the way. That it's so obvious that, and you saw it in the game that KD played, 11 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that you could, like, I'm just watching in my basement, but you could feel how much that arena, that crowd was just like shook. They're like, oh, this is the real Warriors,
Yeah.
So, like, unequivocally, there's just no way if he's playing, it's over, But
Yeah.
you're right in terms of this cloud of emotion. It is hard to organize your thoughts because the emotions of that final still are remnant. Just like seeing those players like Siakam and Lowry, or it's the Siakam like little spin moves and scoring over Draymond. It's like, oh, here we go again. Oh, he killed us in 2019 with that shit, or like the Lowry bullshit foul. Like he's drawing fouls.
Hmm.
Like it's
Yeah.
just so, or Van Vliet hitting threes. Just all of those are they bring those unpleasant memories back.
I mean, I enjoy watching Siakam because now that he doesn't have Kawhi, like he's still good, but people are like, "Oh, okay, this guy isn't that good." At least that's what I've been hearing. My question to you is: do Raptors fans in general? I don't know many Canadian basketball fans, or at least I've never talked to them about basketball too much. And do the folks who are like real Raptors fans, do they acknowledge or do they realize how lucky they were or how they kind of dodged a bullet? Because, like I say it, you say it about Katie and Klay, but you seem to think like everybody believes that. I mean, I've heard it on the low post. I've heard it like, from Simmons. And I mean, it seems obvious, right? Like sometimes I just feel like I'm a homer, but it's pretty clear, right? Like, do they acknowledge that or do they know that? Or they're like, ooh.
I mean, I think the rational Raptors fan will will think about that and be like, yeah, okay, yeah.
Aren't
But
all Canadians rational?
no, no, no. That's a terrible stereotype. But they're fans too, really, right? So they're gonna say like, no, we are. I believe in our guys. Nick Nurse had the defense; he would have schemed it, and blah blah blah. And we had Kawhi, and so I think that there's a strong segment that believes in their team, and yeah, it's good for them, and to be fair too, the vibe when you go to the Raptors game is really good. It's Oracle esque. There's a real kind of ascendant fandom in the city because it's generally a younger crowd of people
Hmm.
who follows basketball, whereas hockey is more kind of older and white, and
Right.
Raptors fans are younger and more diverse.
Right.
And it's just that reflects the demographics of the area, and so it's cool to see that. And but I think the people who are big time basketball fans, they'll probably grudgingly say, yeah, but they'll also say, yeah, but it wasn't fair that you had Katie in the first place. Like that type of fan, right? It's like, oh, it's not fair. They wrecked the league.
Those, yeah, I can't talk to those people.
No. There's nothing to say to them, right? There's nothing to say to them. I mean, and those are the same people who hated on the Warriors all those years. And the thing that killed me was there were some people on my softball team. I love them. We've been playing together for years. But it was like the before they got Kawhi, the Raptors had lost, I think, consecutive years to LeBron in the playoffs and getting
Hmm.
swept out or just being embarrassed.
Right.
And then when the Cavs were playing the Warriors, they would be like, "Oh, I'm rooting for LeBron." It's like, what? You can't just root for the guy who beat you. Like, what? Why are
No,
you
you
going to
can't.
so many like these mental somersaults to root against the Warriors? Like, I didn't get that at all. That was weird.
I empathized with the Raptors and their fans every time LeBron and the Cavs like shat on them.
And
Like
they really, I mean, it really was shitting on the Raptors. Like, it was embarrassing.
wasn't there one year where the Raptors had the best record in the league, or maybe the
Yep.
East only,
In the
but
East, yeah.
but everyone knew, once the playoffs came, LeBron was just going to own them. You know what I mean? So like I was like, oh man, I was pulling for Toronto, and because I'm pretty indifferent to the Raptors before the 2019 finals, and I'm like, hey, oh, okay, cool. We're going to see them in the finals. I like Toronto. I almost moved there a long time ago. And it seems to have one of the most diverse fan bases, at least in terms of the people at the games, right? because there's a lot of diverse cities, but like when you look at like fans that are in the stands, I personally think the Warriors have a decent amount of diversity, and then I think Toronto's like second, just off the random eye test. You know, like you look at a Knicks game, I just think it's like rich white people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay, cool. You know, this is gonna be great. You know, we're gonna kick their asses, but hey, at least they made it to the finals.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I was like, I hate the Raptors.
I know.
I hate Toronto fans. I was like, oh, they actually are like talking shit as if they really belong here. Oh man, I sound like a nut job.
No, and that was the hardest part about it. It's just like with Steph, and even this season, I always feel with Steph, there's always a chance, and I think that you saw that played out in the series, even though we lost. Like they always had a chance because of what he can do, the gravity and all that kind of thing. And so that's what was so hard about it. The other thing that was hard about it is I had been home in the Bay Area, I think in May of that year. So actually it was during the Rockets series. And and I think my sister gave me one of those flags that you put on your car. Like and I was just like, ooh, I can't wait to put this on my car like after they win. And it's like, and the thing is still wrapped up. I was so annoyed. Like, what am I gonna do with it now? I mean, at least it doesn't say Warriors 2019 NBA champions. It's not like one of those T-shirts they ship off to like a poor country or something.
What are some of your memories of that series? The things that you have to expunge from your soul.
Okay, I mean, this is more the rational mind. This is the rational mind. They should have had Damian Lee on the roster instead of Alfonso McKinney.
Yep.
I was looking at Alfonso McKinney's stats. Let me just call it up here. He averaged 2 points per game on 31% shooting. Yeah, oof is right. Like they just had no shot makers. I know Damian Lee hadn't played that much, but he did have a stretch though in the season where he was playing somewhat regularly. He showed his abilities. I think he was still a two-way guy then, but totally was available to be activated. But I think you have to set your rosters at the beginning of the series. And I'm sure they thought like, oh, McKinney, switchy wing, he can get out and guard Kawhi, which he couldn't. He got destroyed every time he was on Kawhi.
Yeah.
And McKinney was coming off of a series in the Portland series where he played pretty well. So I understand the rationale, but it's like, well, maybe sometimes you need to go with the guy who can make a shot and who isn't scared. When they would run that box and one, anytime somebody was taking a shot, it's like, that's not going in. Anybody besides Klay. It's like, that shot's not going in. That shot's not going in. Like any of these dudes on the perimeter, like Quinn Cook, Jerebko, like they were all like, I'm sorry to say, but they were kind of garbage in the series, right? They didn't make any shots. So, I mean, Quinn Cook, 38%, 31% from three. I think he had one okay game. Jerebko, 28%. I mean, get that guy some help. Get Steph some help.
I distinctly remember I have tons of emails where every email I have from you has Damian Lee in caps.
All caps.
And several exclamations. And I'll give it to you, man. Like I could have sworn though, like I thought that you wanted them not to take Jerebko onto the roster, not McKinney. But either way, I mean, you were right.
Either way, yeah.
Because, McKinney, what I remember that guy was best at was like he could get up and get like a rebound. You know what I mean? That was it. He couldn't
crash
a clutch shot.
A little bit, yeah.
He didn't have the quicks to keep up with Kawhi. He didn't have the technique or whatever.
Or the strength.
Skill. Yeah. And Jerebko, like he couldn't get in the games. And when he did, all he could do was shoot 3-pointers that would miss. He couldn't do anything else on the court. He couldn't defend. He couldn't do anything else on offense. And, but it's crazy, right? Like who who would have predicted that, Klay would have gone down and KD would be out? I mean, we always knew this team was a little top heavy, throughout the
Yeah.
season, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have like these three amazing scorers, Livingston and Andre, who could do their thing, right? Like play within their limits at that point in their careers. But then after that, it was like, oh wow, it's really thin, And Quinn Cook, I mean, that dude is best friends seemingly with everybody in the league, but I cannot stand
But not
watching him play
actually good.
basketball. Yeah, he's like it was frustrating. It's frustrating to watch him play. I don't think he's a good player at all, and he proved that in the finals. So, yeah, Damian Lee, man, like you are being proven correct.
Well, I'm still typing in all caps for sure. So as long as I'm going to ride this as long as it can. I mean, when people talk about who, you got your regular season rotation is one thing, but who can stay on the floor in the playoffs? And this was an ultimate pressure cooker, the ultimate test of who could be on the floor. And ultimately, like it was like, okay, well, Steph, Draymond, DeMarcus Cousins, he showed in the series. He couldn't jump, but he could, he did a little bit. Andre and Looney, and that was it, right? Well, I mean, and then Klay, but he got hurt. And even Sean wasn't good in the series either. He was washed by then, And I think that's what is always so emotional about it, is that that feeling of it slipping away. And
I've talked about this before, I think, on the podcast. I keep talking about it because, maybe I sound like a lunatic, but I do believe that there is a universe where if Klay doesn't get hurt in game 6, that he was already having one of his classic Klay Thompson game 6s, and he was showing all the parts of his offensive game. And I mean, he came down, hit like a pull-up 3, which those are amazing shots. And if he doesn't get hurt, the Warriors pull out this game. The Raptors choke under the pressure, and the Warriors take it. And Klay is MVP of the finals.
I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that. Like, he says it himself. He was playing the best. He was the best version of himself, like as a player that he's ever been. Right. And I mean, the eye test proved that, the stats proved that. He was shooting 54%, 58% from 3, 26 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He was just balling out. And they didn't have an answer for Kawhi. And then once they started putting Klay on him, he made it a lot tougher on Kawhi. So it was incredible to see him playing at such a high level. And I absolutely agree. We close out that game 6, and in a game 7 against dudes who have been there before, I don't know, man. I think we would have had a really good shot. I really believe that.
Yeah, I mean, anything goes in a game 7. You know what I mean? Like, so with all that momentum and a little bit of a doubt in the back of these Raptors players, even though they weren't all there when they would get whooped by LeBron James, those doubts, those thoughts creep in, And that's the thing about Klay and his game at that point. And like when people talk about him coming back from the ACL and then coming back from the Achilles, they're like, oh, he's just, spot up shooter. He won't lose his shot. But it's like he was really, he had like, he could score at every level, all 3 levels. You know what I mean? His post up, his mid range, his pull up, going to the basket. Not the quickest guy, but like he was far more aggressive and he was far more skilled. He had more moves and he was just working so hard. Like he was becoming at age, what is it, 29? I don't know, 28, 29.
28.
God damn. He was becoming an extremely well-rounded player. And I don't know if we'll see that to that extent. I mean, I'm guessing no, just hypothetically, because you're not going to be 100% coming back from those 2.
And he'll be 30 or 31. It's just not going to happen, right? And like we've talked about, when KD came, we got robbed of prime Steph, and we've gotten robbed of prime Klay. So that's really that's part of the emotion. That's part of the emotions too, right? It's we lost, and it wasn't the best of us, right? Like 2016 that we lost, and that was the best of us, right? with a little bit of interference, external
Uh,
interference. But we don't
yeah,
need to talk about that.
yeah.
Um,
That's something else.
it's a different episode.
Yeah,
But yeah, I it's almost cliche to talk about the narrative, right?
right.
But the narrative would be so different for all of these players, for this team, for the legacy. Uh, if he went for a layup instead of a dunk, like if he went for a layup instead of a dunk, he probably wouldn't have gotten so upended. Like he may have.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that was dirty?
I mean, it doesn't look dirty,
Yeah.
but
I don't think
like,
there was intent.
but the thing is, like, you can make a play, like you can make a dirty play without looking dirty, right? All
Yeah.
you got to do is be in the right spot at the right time. But obviously, there's no intent. Like, you're not gonna be like, I'm going to tear this guy's ACL.
Yeah.
It's more like just kind of being competitive, like to annoy somebody or
Yeah.
whatever. But I still hold a grudge against Danny Green.
Me too. Like there was a one point where they were like, "Oh, Danny Green could fit in the traded player exception." I was like, "No way! There's no way! I do not want him."
Yeah, but yeah, man, like, just again on Klay, it's like that imaginary place where he doesn't get hurt, they win that game. Like, I really think, like, I mean, Steph was playing well. He carried them in every game, right? He was the only one who could. But if Klay brings them back from the brink in game 6 and then, balls out in game 7, there's a decent chance he becomes finals MVP.
Yeah. I
Although
mean,
they
I'm,
might give
I'm
it.
sure it would depend on what happens in Game
Right.
7, but
Yeah, and I'm taking many layers of, like, hypotheticals, right? This happens and then this happens and that
yeah.
happens,
But the narrative is definitely part of how they vote for those things, right? Like the
Yeah,
narrative fit for Andre to win that MVP. When I think as we get farther away from that, and the more people look back at that, and the
yeah,
more it's this question of like, oh, Steph never won a Finals MVP. It's like looking at that, it's like, whoa, he was incredible. He should have won the MVP. Right.
yeah,
But at the
yeah, yeah.
time, it is an annoying thing about the NBA. It's like, it's so narrative driven. Because at the time it was like, oh, LeBron should win the MVP, even though he lost.
Absolutely. And we've always talked about narrative, right? Like, I think we talked about narrative before everybody else did. I don't know, but I used to talk to you, or at least over email, and be like, "Oh man," even when the dynasty was like in its prime. Actually, after they lost to the Cavs, I was like, "Oh man, we're gonna turn into the Atlanta Braves of the '90s."
I remember you
Like,
saying that.
I was like, it's totally like pissed off. No, this is exactly what's going to happen, and the narrative is like, oh, they were good but not good enough. We're going to be like the Buffalo Bills,
Or that Patriots team that went undefeated but didn't win the Super Bowl. It's like nobody cares about
Right?
that. They weren't the greatest team.
Yeah, yeah. But that was, yeah. I won't even get into that. Actually,
Another episode.
That Raptors series. I guess I'm glad it was Toronto, as opposed to like Cleveland again.
Oh yeah, thank God.
I don't have as much disdain for any other Eastern Conference teams because the Warriors never really played them. It kind of sucks that the two Warriors losses in the finals had a lot of what ifs. I do actually want to ask you, just curious, unrelated to Toronto, when you run into people who argue that the Cavs didn't have Kyrie and Kevin Love in 2014-15 in the finals, do you think that is a fair argument when you talk about like the Raptors winning or how the Warriors lost in 2016? You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so before 2019, I would always respond the way I would respond to that by using Draymond's quote. I think he said, "Well, if I was 7 feet tall, I'd be Anthony Davis." Like, he's like, well, you could wish on these things all you want, but it didn't happen. It's not true, right? and then here we are speculating on all these kinds of things. But I guess the difference is that whenever people mention the 2015 thing, like, oh, we had Kyrie and Kevin Love, I the way I talk about 2019 is I definitely always make sure to give the Raptors credit because, like, for all of the reasons that we have already stated, they won the series, you know. So I do understand the impulse because I'm a fan, and I do allow myself to wonder about these things, but ultimately I know that it's not gonna change anything, and it's not useful to argue about it either, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that as fans of this community of Warriors fans and diehards, like, we can talk about it, and if people want to think we're losers for it, that's fine, right? Like that's that's part of it, I guess.
Well, then they're losers for listening.
That's right. Go subscribe to something else. No, wait, no. Don't stay.
Yeah.
Stay. We'll turn around the loser talk. This is the only episode of loser talk.
But in terms of like the 2016 team, right? Like there, because a lot of Warriors fans say, "Oh, well, we didn't have Draymond for game 6, or was game 5? Whatever.
It was
Game 5. It was game 5. It was a closeout game.
Yeah.
And then we lost Bogut in game 6, et cetera, et cetera. And then, like, saying like those conditions are what made the Warriors lose. And Steph was coming off of his knee, and Andre had like a bad back, so he couldn't dunk that shot or something. Actually, I think he says because J.R. Smith was in the way, and he would have dunked it, but like something, whatever, he was standing in front of him in a weird spot. But like, that's what people say if you're a Warriors fan. But then Cavs fans will be like, well, we did have Kyrie and Kevin Love. Do you think that's equal?
No, because it was obvious that there was lobbying to get Draymond suspended. And that is not part of the game.
Yeah.
That's cheap. Like, you want to win that way? Like, he was obviously lobbying. We know who we're talking about. He was lobbying in the post-game press conference directly for that. Like, who does that? And that's why, like, for all his like activism and non-basketball things, it's great. But like, that's bullshit. Because that didn't have, like, what? That's not part of the game. Like, you want to play the best, right? You don't want to play, and you want to win against the best. You're a competitor. You don't want to go against a weaker team, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, those series were just so annoying, because of him and the way he is and the cast. Ugh.
Yeah.
Come on. Give me a break.
Yeah. That's why I was so bummed that the Warriors lost when they finally didn't have to play LeBron anymore.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, come on.
They bring up different emotions, those two series. I mean, the 2016 is definitely about like the loss of that, or the trajectory of that narrative.
Yeah.
And you and I have spoken about, like, oh, what would you rather have? Back-to-back 2015, 2016 championships, or the KD era? And I still don't know if I have the answer to that. What's your answer?
I'll take 2015, 2016. Are you kidding me? Yeah, like I loved the KD years, but again, going to the peak Steph conversations we've had,
that's
I want to know what a guy who won the first unanimous MVP, coming off another finals, having made 402 3-pointers in a season, changed the game at the height of his hype, at the height of his powers. I would have loved to have seen that. You know what I mean? Like, that's one thing, like, I think the basketball world would have been better for, as opposed
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
sure, like people say, oh, it's great to see the Cavs come back. No, but what I'm saying is, like, in terms of basketball excellence, hey, you could have, that means KD doesn't come to the Warriors, right? So people don't have to complain and whine about that. But instead, you have this 6'3", in terms of NBA standards, not the most athletic guy who is continuing to dominate. You know what I mean? Just out of pure curiosity as a basketball fan, I would have loved to have seen that, And the
what
KD years I
mm,
enjoyed, but like, I mean, just like the players didn't seem to get as much joy out of it, I didn't either.
that's for sure. That's for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it was great to see him up close and how amazing of a player he was. Honestly, that was one of the hardest things about being here too. Is like I have nobody to talk to about this, right? Like nobody cares, like, especially in the years that they didn't play the Raptors. And 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 just to go back to my softball team, so in 2019, like, I mean, as much as I thought their behavior about rooting for LeBron in the year before was weird, I have to say I have to give it to them that they didn't rub it in my face, like, because we play softball in the summer, and all summer they could have been on me for beating the Warriors, but they didn't, and I think they talked about it ahead of time, like, yo, don't talk about the Raptors, okay? Don't talk about the Raptors. So I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't rub any sports in anyone's faces at this point. Maybe because I'm older and wiser, or I just have the scars of being a Warriors fan and seeing the heartbreak of their losses, and even Niners and Giants losses and A's losses growing up. Like, I don't know. Maybe I just tend to, like. I mean, a lot of sports fans, like, they feel the losses more than they feel the wins. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
losses in terms of, like, the ones that you knew you should have won, like the Niners losing to the Vikings, when they could have uh, repeated, or Roger Craig fumbling to the Giants.
Or even the Kaepernick Super Bowl. It's like,
Yeah, or
stop
or
throwing it there.
or the Alex Smith team that I forgot who the guy was on the Niners who, like, muffed two punts,
Yeah.
a few years back, or when the A's lost to the Dodgers, or when the Giants lost to the Angels. Like, I feel those very,
Oh,
very deeply to the core of my sports fandom. Is this cathartic for you? Is this helpful? Because we've only talked about this over email. I've talked about this to a couple people randomly, but no one understands it the way no one understands the way I feel out of all my friends. No one understands it the way you do.
I think what you're saying though is that you remember those losses more than others. I don't think it'll ever not hurt. And for people who aren't sports fans, like, they don't get that. But they're not listening to this. So the people who are, you understand that. Like, it doesn't, it never stops hurting. I will say though, the only thing, there was a different feeling with 2019 in that, um like, because we're so in our heads about narrative, like we could see the narratives happening, like, playing out as the clock is
Yeah.
winding down. But at the same time, there was a lot of pride as a fan, um the heart of a champion kind of thing. Like, they had nobody, as we've talked about, they had nobody out there. You had Looney with a broken chest. You had uh Cousins with, like, he couldn't jump, and they were fighting to the end. And so in that sense it was different than some of the other losses, some of the other painful
Yeah.
losses, or it was painful in a different way. There was at least a little bit of honor in it.
One narrative that I didn't like was that, like, Kawhi was putting the end to another dynasty. The way that people say he did that to the Miami LeBron teams and whatnot. I was like, oh, come on.
No,
Oh, come on.
no, I'm
And
buying that.
and not even whether or not the dynasty ended, but more just like he was the reason, like, no, injuries were the reason. You know what I mean? And yes, injuries are a part of the game. Uh, but all of a sudden, creating that storyline, I was like, that's not entirely fair. You know what I mean? But in the grand scheme of things, like you said, if you're not a sports fan, then what the hell are these guys talking about? If you're not a Warriors fan or a longtime Warriors fan, what the hell are these dudes talking about? They could be taking a nap, instead of reminiscing about a basketball series. That shot of Steph sitting on the court while they're attending to Klay,
Oh,
I was like, oh
it's
man.
heartbreaking.
I was like, this is very, very old school Warriors that their final game at Oracle is going to be a loss in the finals.
Totally. Totally.
And I was like, well, isn't that nice?
Isn't that fitting? Isn't that fitting?
I was like, hey, the basketball gods have not forgotten us. That series also made me like dislike Kyle Lowry. I know he's a
Yes.
great guy, and that's an irrational thing, but like I used to want him on the Warriors way back when. I can't believe he's been in the league this long. But I mean, he's good enough, but it seems like forever he's been in the league. He's like poor man's Chris Paul to me. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
way
Yeah. That's a
he
good analogy. So annoying. So annoying and cheap.
yeah, and the idea that I've debated this with other folks, is Kyle Lowry a Hall of Famer in your mind? Because I will say for me, oh hell no. Like the reason why he has so many All Star berths is because he plays in the East, and the East has
Mhm.
been like far lesser in this age of point guards. All the point guards have been in the West, whether it's Steph or Russ or Chris Paul. I mean, and all the people that couldn't even crack the All Star roster, he made it a bunch because there's no one else there except for Kyrie.
I mean, the Basketball Hall of Fame is weird. It's not as codified as a Baseball Hall of Fame. Like Baseball Hall of Fame has
Mm-hmm.
a lot more history, and it's much more contentious, right? Like you can go to like, or it used to be, it'd be like you hit 500 home runs, you have these counting stats, like you're a Hall of Famer. But the Basketball Hall of Fames is like, well, he kind of did this, and he played in the Olympics, and he was good in college, so yeah.
And he has a
So
finals like win, right?
yeah, so it's
And
kind of like some of these things. It's like I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer. Like if I was to look at it as a baseball fan and just looking at counting stats, I'm looking at them right now. It's like I would say no. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I think he's fringe. Like maybe, or if he has a couple more like great late career years. And I also don't know how to read these advanced analytics of basketball, so I'm just trying to look at his comparables. So, I mean, yeah, he might be starting to get in that conversation. I will say that from the local perspective here, uh, by now he's like, and I think the championship and Kawhi leaving, uh, definitely stamped Lowry as the greatest Raptor of all time, which is not saying much because the team's only been around for 25 years or so. But so yeah, I mean, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but he's the greatest Raptor of all time. So there you go.
even more than the amazing Danielle Marshall.
Well, I don't know if you want to transition to this, but
Oh.
because so I've been
Yeah.
doing some research, and I wanted, because we were going to do this look back, I wanted to look at who were the best players to play for both the Warriors and the Raptors. And because the Warriors have been around for, since the 40s, I didn't look at their all-time rosters. There'd be too many players. So I just went to the Raptors because they've been around for 25 years, whatever. And then I knew enough of the Warriors players so this is anecdotal, it's not exact, but of all the players that played for both teams. And so I went on Basketball Reference, looked at all-time Raptors roster, and picked out the top 15 players by my estimation. It's not exact. The people who I thought were the top 15 players. And kind of like what you've said before is like, these teams have very little history together. I mean, I think, the biggest point of intersection in history was there was the Vince Carter trade.
Right.
So the Warriors drafted him and flipped him for Antoine Jameson. which is the guy who they wanted, apparently. Anyway, we don't have to rehash that, but whatever, right? And so Vince Carter never played for the Warriors, and it wasn't like I mean, that's just what it is, right? But so he never played for the Warriors. So I wanted to try to look for who was the best player that played for both teams. And so
The
there's two
best.
players. There's two players on this list, Vince Carter and Jose Calderon, who I thought were good players, like probably the best out of these top 15. But they didn't play for the Warriors, so we got to throw them out. And then there's a few other players. So Barbosa played for both teams. Marco Bellinelli, but he played for the Warriors early in his career, wasn't very good. Muggsy Bogues, he played for us but he was pretty washed. Jeremy Lin didn't do much for either team, but played for both. So going through the list, I'm going to posit that Donyell Marshall is the best player to play for both the Warriors and Raptors, in that he was the biggest contributor to both teams. Like, he played several seasons, played decently, or had at least decent counting stats. And whereas these other players, it would be like, oh, Chris Boucher took like 3 shots for us in 2 games, and Chris,
Mhm.
he's balling out now. So that doesn't count. Like, there was significant contributors. The only other competitors, I think, to this is Jarrett Jack. He played 2 seasons for the Raptors and 1
Mhm.
season for the Warriors, and averaged comparable stats for both teams. And then if you like your narratives or you're a ring counter, Patrick McCall might be the greatest Raptor and
Boo.
Warrior of all time.
Boo.
Won championships on both rosters. But I'll say that I think Donyell Marshall is the best player to play for both the Raptors and the Warriors.
I think I would agree with that because I can't think of anyone else. And based on your very, very specific parameters, yes. Who else? I would say my favorite would have been Muggsy, just because, I don't know, he's 5'3". He wasn't very good for the Warriors, and that team was terrible in general. But you know, he at least played for both teams. So that's a huge thing, right? If Vince Carter had played half a season for the Warriors, then it's Vince Carter,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. But yeah, Donyell Marshall, it just shows you that he was so mediocre that he got traded like when he was in the prime of his career. Was he traded from the Warriors to the Raptors, or
No,
was
not
he?
directly. He had some stops in between.
How did
But
how did
he was,
Donyell leave the Warriors? I totally forgot.
you know what? I think it was in a trade because he went to the Jazz. But I don't know who we got back. But I don't. And did he leave as a free agent? I don't think so. Why would you go to the Jazz? Maybe he did. I don't know. I have to look
I
that
don't know.
up. But maybe
I have
we
to cut
got
this out
Sheldon
'cause,
Anderson back for him or something like that.
let's see. Wait, I just googled it. We got, oh god, it was a 4-team non-player deal.
Ooh, did we get Felton Spencer?
Okay, hold on. 4-team trade. The Warriors traded Don Yelda to Utah. The Celtics traded Dana Barros to the Mavs. Celtics traded Danny Fortson to the Warriors. Mavericks traded Robert Pack and Hot Rod Williams and Cash to the Celtics. Dallas traded Bruno Sundov to the Jazz. Warriors traded Bill Curley to the Mavericks. The Jazz traded a 2001 first round pick, who became Joseph Forte, to the Celtics. The Jazz traded Howard Isley to the Mavericks, and the Jazz traded Adam Keefe
Oh,
to the
Adam
Warriors.
Keefe. Okay.
Oh boy, that is a vomit of mediocrity. Wow.
And Danielle's still probably the best player in that trade. Like, I remember being really excited about Danny Fortson. He's like, "Oh, double doubles," but
Yeah, I
that's about
wasn't
it.
that excited. Were you, like, I was. Were you excited about Jason Caffey?
I was. I was championship pedigree.
Yeah. I was like, oh, he must be good. No, I
He
was.
played for the
I'm a little older
Warriors.
than you, and I watched him play when I was in college in Chicago, and I was like, this guy's not. He's not the business.
Um, I will say that the Adam Keefe. I was still in college then, and so we drove up from Santa Cruz, and I was like, I was determined to get on TV. So if you had to write like a witty sign, right? And so like the two ones that I did, um, right, and that was when lower bowl seats were super cheap. They were like I think they were $17, and
Yeah.
and then so one of them was keef the ball away from Adam. So not that good, not very good, but the other one I'm pretty proud of was I did it all for the Mookie because Mookie Blaylock.
Oh,
They-
I've always pronounced it Mookie.
well,
But
there
you're like
was that
Mucky.
song, right? It's like a
Yeah,
Limp Bizkit
that
song.
yeah, that's one of the worst songs of all time.
Yeah, but
Um,
it was very contextual to the time,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I managed to get the attention of not the camera person, but the dude that coils the cable,
yeah. Okay,
like the camera assistant, and we
yeah.
managed to get that person's attention, and we're like, "Hey, check out these signs," and we got a shoulder shrug, like kind of like, it's okay.
Well, I gotta say, the first one. I mean, were you actually jeering Adam Keefe?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not gonna make it, man.
Well,
I mean, it's funny. If I saw some like college guy like with that sign, I'd be like, that's funny. But I don't know if they would put that on the air. You might as well just have a sign that says like you suck.
but this was
um,
creative.
you're another sign guy because Vubang makes signs as well, and I'm like, I've always been like, who are these guys that make signs? Bring them to games, you know. Uh,
I only did it that one time. I was so let down. So let
yeah,
down by not getting
he
on
says
TV.
he's only done it twice. That's like always the first thing he says. Like, I only did it 2 times, and you're like, I only did it one time. My response, sure.
Well, this is
um,
I'll tell you, NBA rosters have a 15 player roster, right? The active 15 player roster for this year. If it was this is my all-time team culled from that whole list. So this is just in alphabetical order. And I know we threw out Carter and Calderon, but I'm just going to leave them on this list.
mhm.
So this is the alphabetical order of the top 15 players. If I was the GM, so Leandro Barbosa, and we're throwing out those kind of rules about like were they washed or did they play. So Leandro Barbosa, Marco Bellinelli, Muggsy Bogues, Chris Boucher, Jose Calderon, Vince Carter, Jarrett Jack, Jeremy Lin, Danielle Marshall, Patrick McCaw, Alfonso McKinney, Mikael Petrus, Carlos Rogers, Cliff Rozier, rest in peace, and Jason Thompson. So pretty shitty team. And this
Wow,
is
that is a terrible team.
this is a terrible team. And this is my starting lineup. I'm going small. I'm going with I'm going with Vince. I'm going with Danielle, Jose Calderon, Jeremy Lin, and Mikael Petrus.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
Mikael Petrus is
really?
like my 3 and D guy. Um,
Wow,
I wanted to put Muggsy, but that starting lineup would just be so small. So I
yeah.
needed some size. Petrus is basically the center on this team,
Okay, okay. Let
right?
me
So
let me take a shot at this. Let's see. I would do Vince Carter, Jose Calderon. Um,
hey, don't sleep on Daniel Marshall too, the greatest Warrior Raptor of all time. If you need me to read his stats, I have it right here.
No. I'd put Barbosa in the game, even though he
In the
came off the
starting
bench a
lineup? In the
lot.
starting lineup?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Because I'm going small too, and I would put. Man, this is slim pickings.
It
I'm like looking
really
for a
is.
big guy, and there is no big guy. I'll put Daniel Marshall and Chris Boucher, because he's the
Whoa,
only
Chris
tall person.
Boucher.
Yeah, I mean Jason Thompson wasn't very good. I'll take Chris Boucher just for sheer potential, because there's no one else on this list who I remotely like that much. I sure as hell ain't putting um, Alfonso McKinney on that team,
Well,
in that starting lineup.
I'll say that Chris Boucher is who I thought Carlos Rogers would be. Like, man, I thought Carlos Rogers was going to be so good, and I think where he's the one we picked with we traded Sharunas for the Carlos Rogers pick.
Yeah, I was hoping that he'd be like, that athletic power forward center type that was the trend at the time. So I thought he would be like a decent replacement, but obviously he wasn't. Vubang also said that he was high on Carlos Rogers, and I was high, but like not to the point where you guys really sound like you thought he was going to be like really good, like I thought he'd be like helpful, but
because back then, like, you just had to run around and dunk, right? Like, block some shots, and you would just be impressed by that. And yeah, he did that. He dunked and he blocked shots. Like, he wasn't good, but it was like, ooh, if he just develops, and he played 20 minutes a game, which is kind of,
wow.
Is that more than Wiseman right now?
Man, I remember that season because the Warriors started out 7-1 with Hardaway and Sprewell, and then they just became awful, and then they traded Hardaway.
Those were some bad times. That was really bad times. Anyway. And the other person, I mean, Cliff Rozier, I really liked him in his rookie season. Like, apparently, like, there was all these things going on with him, and he had some mental health problems and substance abuse later on. He passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's the story of the Warriors in the 90s. It's like, oh, they're gonna be so good. He was gonna be that, like, backup big who could grab boards and eat the glass. And
yeah, because when the Warriors were decent in the beginning of that decade, they had guys like that, whether it was like a Big Vic or a Chris Gatling or a Tom Tolbert, like guys who weren't, or even Larry Smith, in the late 80s. It's like Cliff Rozier was kind of like those dudes, but I don't really remember how he ended up leaving the team or all that stuff. But he seemed like in that line of solid, thick power forward role players. You know what I mean? Because the Warriors never had great forwards, right? It was always like the small guys. So. But that's a whole nother podcast, man. Like year by year, reliving the 90s. Should we do that season by season?
Definitely. I'm down. I know which season. There's 2 seasons I want to talk about. So
yeah, you're down with some self-flagellation.
It's gonna be rough. If you thought talking about 2019 was hard and a cloud of emotion, you talk about the 90s. That's gonna be rough.
All right. Well, that was a very, very helpful, cathartic episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast, at least for us, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So
the pain hasn't gone away, but it was good.
Yeah. Be sure to rate, subscribe, leave a comment. Check us out at oaklandwarriors.com, and be sure to tell your fellow Warrior fan friends to subscribe and listen. The Oakland Warriors podcast is produced by National Film Society. That's it. Music in this episode provided by Paper Sun. Special thanks to Paul Amardo for production support. See you next time.